You're listening to Across the Pondcast. Cybersecurity rants and war stories from both sides of the Atlantic.
Hello, and welcome to the first episode of Across the Pondcast. I am Tib3rius. I'm joined by my co-host, Andy Swift, as we talk and quite possibly rant about cybersecurity-related topics with perspectives from both sides of the Atlantic. Andy, I'm excited to kick things off. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling really excited, Tibsy, my boy. I can't wait for this. It's been a long time coming. We rant a lot together in our regular everyday life. So it's good that the internet's going to finally see it all as well. Can't wait.
It is indeed. So yeah, to explain the title of the podcast a little bit, obviously I'm originally from the UK. I'm now in America, but Andy is just a regular Brit. So the concept was I've experienced pen testing in the cybersecurity industry, or InfoSec as it is known over there, for a little bit of my career, but then I moved to the US. So I have sort of views that are, I think, mostly aligned with the US sort of cybersecurity markets. Andy does not. So might make for some interesting discussions.
Yeah, I'm very much on the other side of the pond still. I haven't escaped. I'm still here. I still prefer tea over coffee, and I still can't wrap my head around the size of car spaces in America. Literally insane.
Yes, we do have very big cars and trucks.
You came here not so long ago, and you were very freaked out by me driving down a country road, so scared the bejesus out of you, I think is the words you used.
Well, this episode we've titled, Why Can't Customers Scope? And honestly, as clickbaity as that title is, I think it's actually quite an interesting topic of discussion, especially since it leads into other issues customers have when it comes to pen testing and cybersecurity in general. So I'm looking forward to talking about that and maybe trying to figure some stuff out.
Yeah, who knows? We might even have some tips in there and stuff as well. About how not to scope. Hell knows, we've seen a lot of them, so should we crack on?
Before we get into all of that, Andy, we do have a sponsor for this episode, so we're going to take a moment to tell you about them now. Hacking Hub was created by a few of our friends, Ben aka Nahamsek, John Hammond, and Adam Langley, where they are sharing their extensive knowledge to train the next wave of hackers. What sets them apart is their approach to hands-on learning. They've built an actual infrastructure that is focused on realism. The best part? They offer tons of free content where you can sharpen your skills in recon, web application hacking, and OSINT. Whether you're just starting out or looking to level up your abilities, they've got something for everyone. Frequent viewers of my own live streams may remember the hours I spent last year solving John Hammond's challenging Web Gauntlet bookstore. If you're serious about learning web hacking and bug bounty hunting, you won't want to miss their comprehensive hands-on web exploitation course. Ben and Adam have put together over 12 hours of in-depth content and more than 100 practical labs. Plus, here's an exclusive deal for our listeners. Use code ATPC at checkout to get a massive 60% discount on the course. Go sign up today at hackinghub.io or use the link in the description. Okay, so I think it's worth starting with a tweet that didn't exactly inspire this episode, but it was kind of interesting. It was from GonzoSec. We'll leave a link in the description of the podcast. But the tweet goes, to all you InfoSec and pen test people out there, what's the line you draw between external network penetration test and web app test? You're on an external and a web app you find looks old/buggy. How far down the rabbit hole are you going? Now, I kind of have an opinion on this. I imagine you do as well. My opinion is, generally speaking, if you have time to look into a web app on an external, you probably should, because an external network penetration test is effectively, you're trying to, for lack of a better word, penetrate the external network. And that generally involves finding and exploiting some kind of service. Now, a web application is running on a web server. A web server is a service. A web app is kind of an interface to the web server in a sense. So I think you're not really fully doing an external pen test if you come across a web app and you don't try and at least attack it in some way. But I do think there are limitations. So I wouldn't like go into massive amounts of detail, especially because if it's an external, you're probably time limited a bunch. But it wouldn't be a full web app test, but I think you need to at least do some basic web app testing.
So if I agree with you at this point, that's just the end of episode 1, right? I mean, so yeah.
We've solved it.
We've cracked scoping. Thank you for listening. Tune in next time. No, so I do broadly agree with you. If there is an external service, it warrants some kind of looking at. You can't just ignore it. You can't just say, oh, it's a web app, therefore I'm not going to touch it and we'll leave that for another test, because 100% the client is going to come back and go, oh, hey, some other person's looked at this and found this bug. Why didn't you? We've all been there and we've seen that, done that bit. So you can't ignore it. You've got to do justice to it. I think this is all about a very important conversation you need to have with a client leading into this, which goes, it sort of outlines exactly what you're going to do, where the boundaries are, and how much of a web application test you're going to do. Because you can't lead them down the false path or lead them into an avenue where they think they are getting some kind of full-on authenticated web app test when they're actually not. So it's all about being upfront and outlining exactly what you do and don't do. There's an art to that scoping element. There's an art to talking about it and writing it down. So the other thing is, not everyone reads what's in the scoping documents you give them. So you might detail exactly what web app aspects you're going to pick up on, and it might well be external injections or anything like that, or it might be a little bit further down. You might say, we don't go as far as authenticating to the application. But I think the point is, you've got to have those conversations in two planes. You can't just write it down and expect them to read it in a contract, as crazy as that might sound. In most scoping calls, the early scoping calls you have with them, outline that stuff as well, because that stuff is super important, and it's stuff that they will probably pick you up on if something doesn't go to plan, right? You got experiences of that, I imagine?
Yeah, probably not many that I can talk about, but for sure, I don't really do, the thing is, I don't really do external network testing anymore. Like, I'm fully web app involved for, honestly, probably 8+ years at this point. I just do web app stuff. So that's just my thing. But yeah, I agree generally with you as well. Like, I wouldn't ask for credentials. If I was doing an external network penetration test and I came across a web app and it clearly had a login, I wouldn't just go to the customers like, hey, can I have credentials for this? Like, at that point, I think, yeah, you need to go back to them and say, hey, you need, or maybe in the report, you may mention that you discovered the web app and you did some basic testing, but it really looks like it should have a full web app test. I wouldn't go as far as authenticating. I think maybe the exception to that would be if there's a registration function. If it's a publicly accessible web application, I might register just to see what's beyond the login screen. But even then, I'm not doing any kind of in-depth testing, So yeah, I feel like that's probably the limit.
Yeah, you don't want to be going further than that. It's a time-based thing as well, right? I mean, if you're on a time-limited web application test, time-limited external test, you don't want to be going into the depths of wrapping yourself up in an entire web application as well, and that being your entire focus. There's a reason we have within the industry separate services for this stuff, right? You have infrastructure testing and you have web application testing, you have service testing, etc., etc. There's a reason they're their own little sections and little pieces, because they warrant their own time and their own exposure. To say you're doing a full web application test when you know full well you're basically just doing an external infrastructure test is kind of misleading in a number of ways, and it doesn't do the test justice. It doesn't do you any favors in terms of quality, I don't think, because you'd be putting pressure on yourself to rush through things as well. It's never going to help, is it? So yeah, I think it's just kind of setting up to failure, trying to do too many things. So yeah, be open about what you do and don't do. The client's not going to pull you up on that. In fact, it's probably the other way around. If you suggest to them something like, you probably should be doing a web application test, here are the reasons for doing it X, Y, Z, and lay it out for them, show them the positives to doing things in a certain way, and talking to them about the depths of test you get and the benefits of that, they'll probably bite your arm off for it and come back to you at a later date and book some more testing with you. I think a lot of people value that kind of honesty and that honest approach to, I don't want to use the word consultancy, don't like it, but it's kind of what we do, and at the end of the day. But people do appreciate that kind of honesty, I think, and that kind of technical input into what they're doing, because we'll probably talk about this a bit later, given where this podcast is going in this particular episode. But it might be a completely non-technical person at the other end who might not even appreciate the differences between the different services. So you've got to be aware of that, and you've got to be aware of giving them the right information for them to get the best test. Yeah, my feelings, I guess.
Yeah. And I think as well, it's probably worth pointing out, there is definitely a difference between a web app and a web server. And I feel like maybe it's complicated because obviously there is that really complex relationship there between a web app and the web server that it resides on. The web server is the service. The web app is definitely more of an interface. And it's not really, even in a web app specific test, I think it's not really that clear maybe to customers what is and what isn't tested. In every job that I've done, when I'm testing web applications, we definitely test the server as well. So, talking about doing basic stuff like directory busting is not necessarily an application level thing. That's something that the server's configured on, right? Analyzing server headers, anything to do with SSL and TLS, right? That's server stuff. That's not really related to the application. We still test it when we're testing the application because it kind of is there, and it's definitely a thing that needs to be tested. It's also definitely a thing that you should test on an external, I think. At a bare minimum, if you find a web application, find a web server, you should be testing the SSL. You should be doing some basic directory busting. You should be looking at any kind of headers, and that's kind of the bare minimum, really. But I feel like in a lot of cases, customers might not understand that. And hey, maybe there are some companies out there who flat out refuse to do any kind of web app testing on an external, which I think is a mistake, but hey, maybe they exist.
No, it's definitely a mistake. A web server and a web application, they do have a sort of symbiotic relationship, right? I mean, one can affect the other. You can, as you've proven through God knows how many CTFs you've done by now, how often you can totally dominate a server through a web application that's sat on the front of it, right? Very easy to do, happens quite a lot. So you can't just totally say that we're not going to touch an application at all and take away that kind of relationship and ignore it. One can affect the other. Infrastructure can affect an application can affect infrastructure. At the end of the day, they both come hand in hand. So yeah, you can't really ignore that fact at all, I don't think. But yeah, there should be that bare minimum of checks, and it's easy enough to outline what those bare minimum checks are, right? At that point of scoping, especially if you are talking about common misconfiguration issues and things like that. I've seen plenty of times when those misconfiguration issues have resulted in pretty bad exploits on their own, actually, to be honest. So yeah, they're worth looking out for.
Yeah, especially when you can sort of chain them as well. So I know, header issues generally aren't reportable, I think, in bug bounties. Maybe they are in some. But a lot of low-level header issues aren't reportable. And yet, they're useful sometimes. When doing actual exploit chains, you can turn a pretty simple XSS into something really quite serious if the headers are misconfigured. And that's definitely something to watch out for. So yeah, I understand why they're not reportable, because it's like everyone would just freaking spam, oh, by the way, headers misconfigured, and it's like really annoying. But at the same time, it's definitely something that needs to be fixed. So that's sort of like the bare minimum as well.
Absolutely, yeah. You just reminded me of something that happened like literally a week ago, where I think I sent it to you. There's a client storing things like usernames and passwords in cookies, which is insane. Probably seen it a few too many times to be completely shocked, but yeah, it just goes to show it's sometimes not always the fancy exploits. I mean, if people are doing absolutely mental things like that, then it's always worth checking these things. So they're not complicated things to check. So yeah, yeah, they hold value for sure. So I guess we're saying at the end of this, right, we'll do a bit of application testing, but not too much. Just be careful,
Yeah.
careful with your scopes. I mean, the general advice for me is just have those conversations up front with your clients. Make friends with them. Be nice to them. It'll go a long way in building relationships if you're upfront. Not only in protecting your own results and just making sure they know exactly what they're getting, but also making sure you become that sort of trusted advisor that they're seeking at the end of the day. Because a lot of them really need a trusted advisor.
Yeah, and ultimately, I figure external infrastructure. I mean, and you probably know this. You probably have the stats on this more than I do, but I would imagine external infrastructure for most companies is mostly web applications.
More so, increasingly more so. I mean, when you and I first started years ago, maybe not. There's all sorts of random junk people used to put internet facing. I mean, that's not to say they still don't. Look at the recent 40 manager stuff that was going around the internet. Like how many of those were exposed that probably shouldn't have been. So people are still doing crazy stuff. But yeah, it's definitely increased over the years a lot, especially in sort of service and API space. Like we see a lot more of those on externals now. Is the amount of time we've come to do external infrastructure tests, and we got there and we find nothing but API endpoints. So we're like, okay, you planning on testing these APIs, or, or are we doing just external test here? Because that's I suppose that's the other flip side, isn't it? Is when the scope is completely misaligned to begin with. We see it all the time when people come to us with requesting infrastructure tests when actually it's just an entire range of web applications and APIs. And it's great because you're testing basically web servers, but they're missing so much of the rest of the sort of attack surface that they need to look at. And by not doing that, they're kind of missing a huge chunk of information. They're risk registers at the end of the day, because it's up to them. They've got to kind of quantify all these risks you're putting in front of them, right? And if they're only paying for wanting and we're delivering half a story, that's not really going to be helpful for anyone at the end of the day. They walk away with a sort of a false sense of, yeah, we're all good, when we full well know we're sitting there and we've got like a load of APIs that haven't been tested. So yeah, it's a hard one. But again, it goes back to those important conversations you need to have in outlining exactly what they're getting. I think a lot of pen testers generally, I don't know if you experience a similar thing. I seem to, over the years, I've noticed a lot of sort of reluctance to being that kind of trusted advisor, and almost going back to the client and telling them this is what I think the scope should be. I've never had a problem with telling people what I think's bad about a scope, and I know 100% you don't as well. But I see it a lot across the industry, but quite a few people don't necessarily have that confidence. Maybe missing a trick there.
Yeah, no, I agree. I honestly think it's doing a disservice if you don't tell the customer that something that that's the thing. And maybe customers don't understand this as much as they should, and maybe that's on the industry in general. But scoping, especially scoping for a web application, is a lot of guesswork. And what I mean by that is you can give me a 30-minute or even an hour demo of your web application, and that is useful. But I might come away thinking, okay, well, I could probably do that in 5 days. And maybe while I'm testing it, it quickly becomes like the realization that, oh, this is way more complicated than a 5-day test. Like this would have been better at 10 days. And yeah, at that point, it's like you have to kind of go back and be like, you talk to your account manager first and say, hey, I think we underscoped this. I think to do a comprehensive test, which we can talk about what comprehensive really means later. But to do a comprehensive test, we'll need, maybe even 7 or 10 days for a test, just because like functionality is a little bit more difficult. You got to remember as well, if you're a customer, you kind of come in knowing how the application works already. You've had experience with your own application. What you're asking a pen tester to do is, one, become kind of an expert in the application over a very short period of time, and two, test the application and make sure it's not vulnerable to stuff. And the second bit is the easy bit for us. We're experienced in that. The first bit is way harder. Like, there are some really complicated web applications out there. There are some applications which require you to go through multiple stages, right? There's a functionality that has like 5, 6, 7 steps in it. And if you don't use the correct inputs at the start, you can't even get to like the later stages. So yeah, it's complicated. And you have to go back and be like, okay, well, we definitely underscoped this. So like and to be honest with you, the times that has happened, customers have generally been receptive to it. Customers, obviously they don't want to spend more money. Like nobody wants to spend more money, but they came to you wanting to get their application tested properly. And, if we think we can't do that in the time that we originally said, then yeah, I think it's worth going back and saying, hey, we probably could do with a few more days on this.
There's an interesting point there about relationships with clients again and having that flexibility to do it. And I couldn't help think when we started speaking as well, that's another thing I feel like a lot of pen testers don't like doing, is going back and asking for more time. And as on the management side of this, I've seen this happen in very weird ways. Like sometimes you'll have testers that will just go out of their way to put the time in and then start burning the candle at both ends to get to the end of something. And that just doesn't do them any favors. It doesn't do the quality of testing any favors, and it doesn't do the quality of output any favors. So I think if you have that open relationship with the client at the beginning and you talk them through that process and they are at the point where they are understanding that, going back and asking for more time shouldn't be a difficult thing, unless you got to ask for it correctly as well. I suppose you got to frame the ask properly. You can't just say more time, please, because I'm bored and need something to do. You got to go back with reasoning and saying the reasons why it was potentially misscoped in the beginning. And those things happen. Misscoped is such a horrible word as well, because it implies that we've done something horribly wrong, like just not read the scoping document or something and just gambled and guessed at some days. I think we need to kind of detach ourselves from that way of thinking almost, because it's not always the way. Sometimes, like you say, you do uncover something unexpected. You do suddenly find a depth of the application is way more than even the client thought it was. Because let's be honest, the client at the other end sometimes is not the technical contact that you would like them to be. Sometimes they might be a project manager who's just been told to go and get a pen test and doesn't really actually know what a pen test is, or doesn't really have any sort of technical background themselves. Shock horror. But that happens. I think it's something we need to work around, because the amount of scoping documents I've seen from clients that don't even have the right information in them is quite concerning. So that at that point it's less about going and gambling, more about going back to them and asking specific questions and going through those rounds of scoping so you get that conversation right. I've seen external infrastructure questionnaires come back and you say, what's the range of IP addresses you want us to test? And they start a list of 192.168. And you're like, so yeah. Best of that time not to just guess, right? They might need a bit more hand holding when you get to that stage. But yeah, we're not magicians. Many of us like to pretend we are, but not. So yeah, it's you might find something, but get familiar with it. Don't be too afraid about going back and asking for more time. If it's within their interest and it's within the quality of testing interest, absolutely get comfortable with doing that for sure.
Yeah, and honestly, even though this episode is cheekily titled "Why Can't Customers Scope," I think there is a lot of blame that some pen test companies have to take on. And there's a very specific example. Almost every pen testing company I've gone to work for has a initial scoping questionnaire for web applications. And that usually involves a question which is framed in it's basically the idea of the questionnaire is to come up with a rough idea of how long we think the scope will be. And generally that can be done by asking, like, how complex is the application? And complexity is realistically kind of the number of functions times by the number of roles, right? So if you have an application that has 100 different pieces of functionality in it and it has one role, that's not that complex. If you have 3 roles, suddenly that's quite a complex application, especially when it you're involving authorization testing, etc. But the thing that I discovered that a lot of the companies I worked at were doing was they wouldn't talk about functionality. They use the term pages, or sometimes even forms. Like, how many pages and how many forms does your application have? And that's such a terrible question, and it's a question that must have been invented in the year 2000 or prior to that. because I've seen scoping documents, scoping questionnaires returned by customers, and when asked how many pages do your application have, they say 1. Why do they say 1? Because it's a SPA. It's a single page application. They're technically correct, but that's such a useless piece of information. But they didn't know it was useless. They were answering the question because a single page application, it's kind of in the name. It has a single page. And so I've had to fight sometimes. Like when I arrive at a new company, I'm like, okay, well, what are your scoping questionnaires like? Like, do you actually ask how much functionality the application has? Because that's a much easier question to understand, right? You can pass that on to your developers. They understand what functionality means, right? Individual pieces of functionality is so much more understandable than how many pages the application has. And so it's just a better question overall to ask how much user functionality. And you can even define user functionality within the question. You can say, okay, well, we count being able to view a profile page, update a profile page as 2 pieces of functionality, right? So that you can even give nice examples of that kind of stuff. And then you can pass that to the devs and they're like, oh, we can estimate, that amount.
I feel the type of questions you're asking in the questionnaires probably relate a little bit to who actually answers them at the other end as well. So if you do just stick something like how many pages do you have in there, that's blatantly going to get answered by someone that doesn't know what they're talking about. So, I mean, sometimes it's a way of angling these questions and being a bit careful about your scoping questionnaires on the content and who's actually answering them. So yeah, got to be careful about that. In infrastructure land, it's a little bit different for us. I mean, scoping external infrastructure, for example, compared to an application is probably quite easy, I'd say. We can quantify things by things like IP addresses, but again, understanding functionality and context of environments, what it does, how it does it, and what we're going to find in those environments, that's also super important. So I've seen some pretty bad questionnaires as well in my past for infrastructure stuff that just base estimates on IP addresses, and then particularly dangerous ones where you don't have a technical lead or anyone like that reviewing scoping documents. You have a salesperson reviewing them. So they literally just go, 20 IP addresses. That must mean this number of days. Sell. Which, from a sales point of view, has its merits, I suppose. From a technical point of view, quite dangerous because we don't know what's in that environment, what it's for, what it's used for. You don't have that depth of knowledge. So there is an art to asking questions and writing questionnaires as well, funnily enough, and getting that information to the right people. Because you don't know who's at the other end. They could be entirely non-technical people for all you know. Give you an example. We did a configuration review probably about a month ago for a client that clearly didn't really know what a configuration review was. It's quite cute, really. But instead of just providing us with, I guess most companies have the same sort of thing. We either do a configuration review via the actual config that's been provided to us, or we jump on a device and review the device. It's a fairly standard couple of ways of doing it, right? This client didn't really know how to do either of those, so didn't know how to get us access to anything, didn't know where to put us. They also didn't know how to export a config to send over to us as well. So what they did instead was they sent us the entire image of the virtual device of their hypervisor. It's like an 80 gigabyte file. And they're like, how do we send this to you? And they started sending us this 80 gigabyte file instead of just sending us like a text file. And then we played the game a bit, and sure enough, booted it up and we're like, oh look, export. Could you just send us like a 1 megabyte file? But no. So yeah, you don't know who is at the other end of these calls sometimes, and it pays to spend a little bit of time with those types of people to make sure you get what you want. Because the amount of times I've seen testers complaining about stuff like that after the facts happened, it's like you could have stepped in earlier. You could probably see this coming. You probably could have given them the information and said, I'm getting this vibe that you're non-technical. Maybe don't phrase it exactly like that. Just don't want to insult anyone. But if you start to get those sorts of feelings and that kind of idea, you know what sort of role they perform within their team, what kind of organization structure they have, you probably know who you're talking to. And you probably know you should maybe not be relying on them to get all the technical data for you that you need to make your test properly contextual. Because that's a kind of secret sauce, really, isn't it? With pen testing, there's pen testing, there's vulnerability scanning, there's telling people about vulnerabilities, and there's making it contextual. to their requirements. That always is a big sort of bonus point you get if you are doing tests. Always seek context of environments that stuff is in, because some things will mean more things to people than others in tests and environments. Certain vulnerabilities might make people scream, certain ones might make them go in other environments. So yeah, context is absolutely everything. Right people, right context, right scope. End.
I feel like there could be a whole just other episode of this podcast called "Why Can't Pen Testers Understand Risk?"
Yeah, I think maybe a series of why can't you understand X. So yeah, maybe the next one is, so this one's why can't client scope. Maybe we have why can't pen tester scope as the next one. It's episode 2 coming your way. So
I want to touch on, I think you mentioned that customers sometimes think that we're like magicians. I think we actually, in the show notes prepping for this episode, we said something similar. Customers think pen testers are wizards. And I feel like we're sort of merging from scoping into logistics right now. Like the actual logistics of the pen test. Like customers sometimes have unrealistic expectations of what pen testers can do and what perhaps they can't do. And it's kind of interesting because most pen testers are not security researchers. Security researchers are the ones that are really discovering a lot of the 0-day kind of attacks on stuff, all right? Because literally that's their job. They're developing new techniques, they're developing new tools. Pen testers are generally speaking reading the work, the research that these people do, and then applying it to other applications. Pen testers aren't going to find, or aren't generally going to find new and exciting ways of exploiting something. They're not going to find new vulnerabilities. They're going to find existing vulnerabilities, right? So like XSS, SQL injection, right? Stuff like that in your application. They're not going to find like usually novel new exploits. That's not going to happen. So I feel like in a lot of cases, customers just think that a pen test is going to find absolutely everything that's wrong with their application, which is just not the case. Like we call it comprehensive, but it's a really weird definition of comprehensive, because it's comprehensive in the fact that it's also time-based. It's like a time-boxed comprehensive, which is such a contradiction in terms. I don't know why we still use the term comprehensive when it's clearly time-boxed. Attackers, and I explain this to customers a lot, especially when customers ask why do you want the WAF disabled, right? And it's like, okay, well, you want the WAF disabled because we don't want any time wasted. You're already expecting us to test this entire app within 5 days. If we're getting constantly blocked by the WAF, that's not really telling you anything other than your WAF works. It's not actually telling you if there's anything vulnerable with the application. Attackers have years. And some attacks have taken years to exploit by attackers. Pen testers have a week, maybe 2, and we're not wizards. Like you have to meet us halfway a lot of the time.
Yeah, exactly right. It's that conversation of WAF versus no WAF. We come up against that all the time when we're scoping with clients, and trying to talk them through what's best in that situation is always interesting. I try and steer them down the way of just doing both, because quite frankly, there are clients out there that do want to test their new shiny thing they've put in front of their web application to protect all of their terrible code. And there are those that are genuinely interested in, how does my code stand up? The WAF is just then the icing on the cake. And I like that as a kind of frame for those conversations. Is I usually approach them and just say, if they're doing an application test and we do have a WAF in front, what we'll do is make sure we're whitelisted, because as you elegantly put, we're on the clock. You're paying for our time to sit there and do that. You don't want to pay for us just to smash our heads against like an established WAF. Like, what's the point in that? We're not exactly the cheapest of resources either, let's be honest. Pen tests are expensive things. Clients are only going to want to send and pay so much money for a test. So, yeah, I usually go with whitelist us to begin with. What we'll do is let's just say it's a 5-day application test for argument's sake. We'll do like the first kind of 3-4 days as we would fully whitelisted. We'll hit as many things as we can. And then right at the end, just before we're about to like end all the testing, we'll then go for like a put your WAF on, take us off the whitelist sort of thing, and we'll test that aspect as well. And then you're providing an assurance of both worlds rather than just going, yeah, let's just ignore one. Because there's general legitimate interest in both, 100%. But yeah, the goal has got to always be to actually test the application. Yeah, it's the same with anything infrastructure as well. In an ideal world, any infrastructure application, my opinion anyway, should be able to sit there quite happily on the internet with nothing in front of it and still stand up and not get screwed immediately. And if it can do that, you've got yourself a really good foundation. And then put your things on top of it to protect it and add more layers of security. Build it outwards like an onion. Do that sort of classic thing. So I'm not saying put all your stuff directly on the internet because Andy says that's fine. Terrible idea. Don't do that. But should be able to have that level of resilience to at least not just get completely destroyed the second it hits the internet. So yeah, I think testing both of those aspects is really important and getting that across in scoping. I don't actually recall a client that has ever not wanted to agree with testing both aspects. Can't recall one, but I haven't managed to be able to talk out of insanity. So far,
it makes sense for them to do it because they're getting a test of their actual application, and then they're also getting a test of the WAF against real exploits that were found. And that's what I always argue. If a customer is sort of giving some pushback, I'd be like, okay, but if we test without the WAF and we find an SQL injection, wouldn't you want to know about the SQL injection and the fact that the WAF either did or didn't block the attack? Because most WAFs are going to just block the single IP address where the payload was delivered from. Well, I hate to say it, but most attackers have an unlimited supply of IP addresses they can just rotate through. And so they're going to be spamming a bunch of payloads, and they don't care if they're getting blocked. They just care about one getting through. And the other point I raised with customers about WAFs is, well, WAF bypasses exist. You know, no WAF is perfect. So you're basically saying, oh, we don't care about the security of the application. We just care that the WAF works. Well, the WAF works right now. In a year's time, is the WAF still going to work? Probably not. It's probably going to have a bunch of bypasses that were discovered, and then your attackers can exploit them. So it really is the best of both worlds to do sort of that kind of, test with the WAF disabled or with it whitelisted at least, and then find as many vulnerabilities as you can, turn the WAF back on the final day or two of testing, and try those exploits again and see exactly which ones make it through. So it also reminds me of a test we did. I think it was an overnight test while we were both back in the UK. And the customer had told us, oh, we have a really sensitive WAF and it's not being turned off. You'll probably get blocked and there's nothing you can do because it's the weekend. And I think we got blocked in the first 10 minutes with some basic like Nmap stuff. Like we even went really slow. I was like, let's go slow and just try a few basic things. And it just like instantly blocked. It's like, no. And then it's like, oh, well, I guess we have to sit around for a few hours to wait for the actual RIPs to get unblocked. I think there was like a timer. And we had access to a bunch of IP addresses we could use, but it was still limited. So yeah, but the customer was well aware. They were like, oh yeah, that's going to happen. Sorry. And I think felt bad for us and realistically didn't want that to happen, but were kind of, they had their hands tied a little bit.
Yeah, I'd totally forgotten about that. Well reminded. That's lost from the past. I also remember that one we did where the client had an entire range of external IPv4 addresses that were just dark. Like they had nothing on them, but they wanted to test them all the same. We're talking thousands of IP addresses that were just non-routable to anywhere. Yeah, so that was another weekend job, I think, wasn't it? They had us sitting up all weekend long just testing IP addresses they knew full well we're not going to respond to anything. Another great test, but it's... I think they were doing it for assurance purposes or something like that. They just wanted to be assured that nothing had leaked out and that it was all as it was meant to be, or it was all completely non-routable. It's just one of those tests, but it's like, yeah. So it's a long weekend, wasn't it? I think we amused ourselves in the end somehow. I'm glad I was on it with you, to be honest. Anyone else I would have gone absolutely mental with.
I think we played Minecraft. yeah. It's probably a slippery slope into playing something. In that case, though, I think you're right. It was kind of a compliance thing. Like, they had to get some kind of report saying that these IP addresses have been scanned and there was nothing there. And I think they were well aware that they were non-routable. Like, literally, you couldn't ping them because there was no route to them, which, nothing's ever going to get through. That's the thing. So they were aware of that. And they still need us to do it. So it was just kind of insane. And the fact that we had to do it over the weekend, because just in case there was something, they didn't want it done during work hours, which is just like, I don't know. It's insane. But it's a problem with scoping. I think everyone was upfront about how ridiculous it was. Like, you guys really want us to do testing on this? And they're like, yeah, sorry. But I think that sort of raises another question. If you are a pen test consultancy, I know you hate the word, but let's just call it consultancy because that's what it is, right? Yeah. If you are a pen testing consultancy and you get a request to do an external pen test, would you expect the consultancy to do some basic checks before we even agree to the pen test, like to determine if the ranges were even routable? Is that something that you would expect to come up in scoping, for example?
I was expected to come up in conversations. I mean, like you say, you work mainly on the web app side, so I don't know how many of like the infrastructure questionnaires and things you see or infrastructure scoping conversations you're part of these days. But certainly when we do ours, in my experiences, I mean, they're all kind of, you sit down and one of the first questions is, yes, that traditional, how many IP addresses do you want us to hit? And then there's always follow-up questions that go, well, how many of them are live? How many of them are routable? How many of them are... Yeah, I think I'd expect that to be part of a fairly normal scope. And I think in this conversation, yeah, you're right. They were 100% upfront with us and said, yeah, it's non-routable. We're doing it for compliance. I think they even said it's coming towards the end of a financial year and we also have money to burn. So, it's part of a conversation as well. So I don't think anyone was under any illusions of how it was going to go down or what was going to happen. But yeah, absolutely. Those scoping conversations, if your scoping questionnaires just say how many IP addresses are there, that is probably a giant red flag right there. You've got to be building in all of those conversations about what's live, what's not, what's going to respond, and what the content of those ranges are. Otherwise, you're probably going to lead yourself down a bit of an odd path at some point in time, for sure.
There's also, I think we made another show note about internal arguments. By which I think what we meant was when you have a company that clearly wants to do a pen test, but there's some element, there's some team in the company that really does not want to do a pen test. And I think if I recall, we did do an internal once where the company itself wanted the internal, but the sysadmins, the IT team, were just completely against it and just didn't want. And I think we had to be like snuck in and placed in like a meeting room and kind of do it without the IT guys knowing about it, which felt really awkward and insane because there's literally no reason for IT teams to see pen testers as adversaries. Like, we're there to try and help, right? No network is 100% secure. Nobody should be blamed. And maybe that's the thing. They just felt like they're going to get blamed for all of the things that we found. But it is interesting. It's definitely a rare occurrence, I think, especially these days. I think pen testing is more accepted. But yeah, I mean, have you come across many instances of that? Because that's the only one I can think of personally.
I do remember that. I remember being escorted into that little room, and then the guy that was escorting us there closing the curtains like little blinds on the room. We were like, oh, okay, this is us. Are you allowed out for lunch? And it was a really strange day. But yeah, I think that is becoming... I don't think that's so common anymore. I think there was a bit of an element of... Well, we mentioned wizardry already, so why not mention it again? I think there was a sort of element of that at some point. The unknown, not knowing what we do, it's kind of dark art magic sort of thing. And then there's definitely that, what if they find something? Oh my God. Whereas the reality is, I think nowadays people accept, you have pen testers in there, but we're going to find something at some point in time. Like even tests you've been doing for years, where clients' networks have matured to a point where we're finding very little when we're coming back year on year and all that sort of stuff. Lovely to see from our point of view, because I had this discussion the other day with someone. They were like, you could make your pen testers cry by doing all of this stuff and not allowing them to get domain admin. It's like, some of them might cry, but I don't know. Some of us might just go, oh, goody, not another Active Directory domain to compromise in 10 seconds. Because it allows us other time to look at other stuff. So yeah, I think that's I think it's a far more accepted kind of relationship now that, we find things, we point out things, break stuff, and someone else's job to fix it. I don't think anyone's really getting fired anymore for a pen test turning up like a couple of issues every now and then. But yes, I have been on some really interesting calls. I think infrastructure lends itself to these kind of quite heated debates and calls at times, because there's always multiple people involved in standing up infrastructures, especially sort of big organizations like big telecom companies, those big sort of networking companies. There's so many people involved at different levels of project management, application guys, service guys, all the way down to like the network com guys. And they all have different roles and different interests and different wants and desires. And when they all come together, oh my gosh, it's such a good recipe for an interesting scoping call, because they argue amongst each other, and it's incredibly fun to watch. The classic example that we come across way more than I would like to think would happen would be wanting to come to do an internal pen test. So I've been asked to go and do an internal pen test on a network, got to site, which is a data center, in the middle of the night, and they've refused point blank to actually give me access to the network, saying, didn't realize you'd need it. It's like, it's an internal network pen test that this guy over here has said that he wants us to do, and now you're bringing us in and telling us like we can't even have connectivity to a network because of security reasons. Oh, good. And this same test, we're also asked to do a build review, and I'm sure there's a lot of pen testers out there that might be listening to this going, I think I know where this is going. And it's that classic scenario of, so many times, do we give the pen testers admin access to do a build review? Do we give them root access? Do we give them sudo access to do a build review? Or don't we? If you don't, we're going to be a bit limited on what we can actually tell you about a system. So there's always that common detachment from, this is a kind of an audit of a build review. It's not, I'm not just coming in here to sit and hack something at this stage. You kind of need to give us some credentials so we can actually see some things. And we've had that conversation before. And it turns out with one of these clients, one of the worst ones we've had, is they wanted us to sit down with them, and they would only take the commands we would give them verbally to the engineer who was authorized with a sudo account to actually sit there and run them. So we're trying to do this whole build review against like CIS benchmarks and just telling this guy commands. We're like, ls minus... we had to read every command to him. He had to input it, tell us the input back again, and then we'd have to interpret it and somehow put it into a report at the end of it. It's chaotic, but it's the only way they would accept us doing that. And there is a point where the client makes it almost impossible for us to actually do the test we want to do. So yeah, careful scoping it goes back to as well, and having those conversations early on and up front. But we're at a good place with that client now, where we have found a workaround for it. But large organizations, there's so much push and pull from all over the place, different project managers, different system owners. There's a lot of politics that goes on sometimes into getting the scope right. It takes a lot of work. You've got to be willing to put those hours in, I guess, and having those frank conversations with them. So for us, it took us sitting down with them and going, this is the result of this test. This is how long it's taking us out of your pool of time you bought with us every time, because you're not allowing us to use any kind of automated tools or any kind of us doing it ourselves. We're having to tell some third-party guy who doesn't really know Linux how to do a build review of a Linux system, and that's a problem. And they soon get the message when you explain the sort of deterioration of the quality of the results, because at the end of the day, they absolutely do care about the quality of results, despite what you might like to think sometimes. So yeah, sit down, have conversations. That's kind of like the moral of this whole story of this podcast, I think, isn't it? Talk to people.
Yeah. And I can think of another example from the web app side of stuff, which is when you're doing authenticated testing and you have an application that has multiple roles, how many roles do you give the pen testers access to? And arguably all of them. And like, there's been instances where I've been on the scoping call and they've said, well, I've said, how many roles does your application have? And they're like, well, we have the main user account, we have like manager accounts, and then we have like admin accounts, but the admin accounts are used internally. So this was an application that was external for their customers, but they have admin accounts for their internal employees. And I'd be like, well, are we going to have access to the internal employee admin accounts? And they're like, no, because that they didn't see that as a risk. And that's where you got to sort of say, well, do you absolutely trust all of your employees that have access to that application? Is there any chance that you might have a rogue employee? right, that can access the application, and maybe there's some kind of exploit in there which allows them to get access to data they shouldn't have. And a lot of the time that even just asking that question, like, do you absolutely trust all of your employees, gives them pause to think, well, maybe we should actually test from an admin perspective. Because the other alternative is that, okay, well, maybe even if they think that the admin interface is only accessible to internal users, maybe there's functionality that a regular manager or even a regular user can access. Like, what happens if you log in as a user and then browse to /admin? Is there any kind of, code in the application that prevents that? And ultimately, maybe it's not at /admin. Maybe it's at some other weird URL that is just, we can't guess. How do you test that? How do you test if a user can't access admin functionality if you don't know where the admin functionality is? So at a bare minimum, you should at least be giving pen testers admin access to their applications, just so, like, even if you absolutely trust everyone who is employed at your organization, which you shouldn't do anyway, but even if you do, like, if you're that naive, you should still give your pen testers admin access just so they can test permissions of the lower users.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. The other thing that really helps me out when having these sorts of conversations with clients is building up a sort of a cache of stories. I like stories, but building up like a cache of stuff where you can point them at things that have happened in the past. So, but the pushback I always get when I say, have you thought about insider effects? Have you thought about, we're talking about WAFs earlier on, so it's another really common one. It's like, oh yeah, but my WAF will stand up to everything in the world. Like, so having like a cache of stories or recent events where stuff has happened is really helpful, because you can kind of frame it at that point in time and tell them real risk and real danger. So you just sat there going, insiders are a thing, they could be a problem. That's not so powerful as going, do you know what, last week XYZ company got popped for this reason, this is how it happened, a really funny story, and bring them on that little journey with you. Or you had a recent WAF or firewall or interface, or 40 managers just happened. Yeah, those sorts of things, you can drop those into conversations. Just go, look, these technologies are not, they're not infallible. They don't stand up to everything and anything. There's not ever a day where there's not a new vulnerability in some kind of major tech, right, or some kind of major product. And the bigger companies are much better at it than some of the smaller ones I've come across. But that's maybe a podcast topic for another day. I feel responsible disclosure. I can sense it coming. But yeah, building up all these stories to help support you and support getting your scope the way you need it to be to deliver a properly good test. That's also really helpful. So yeah, keep a little cache of those. Keep a little notebook. That's what I do.
Yeah, that is a good idea.
Thank you.
I may have to start doing that.
Top tips. You're welcome. Still teaching you things. I joke. You've taught me more about coding than possibly anything in the history of man. I'd still be nesting while loops if it wasn't for you. As the joke goes.
Well, thank you for listening. I've been Tib3rius, he's been Andy Swift, and this has been Across the Pondcast. You can find all of our social media links in the episode description, and we will see you next time.
Tibsy, it's been a pleasure. I'll see you soon. Wow. Take care.
Thanks once again to our sponsor this episode, Hacking Hub. Remember to sign up over at hackinghub.io and use code ATPC to get a 60% discount on the hands-on web exploitation course.